Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about farming and the growth of farming in the West, specifically the Midwest into maybe Utah, Colorado, that area. It's the same area that we've been talking about with our other slides about the West. So we're talking about the farmer's frontier, and this is when farmers start moving into the West as they are offered free land. So the 1862 Homestead Act, which we've talked about before, and we've talked about Oklahoma and the Sooners and the Boomers, offered 160 free acres to anybody who lived on the land for 5 years and promised to improve it. The other option was that people could buy land through the Homestead Act for $1.25 an acre. So a lot of people chose to buy the land. A lot of people also chose to get it for free. And this was the first time that the U.S. government had given away land to promote population growth and also to stimulate family farms. And this allowed for more land to be farmed, and farmers were able to feed a growing U.S. population. In the 40 years after the Homestead Act was passed, about 500,000 people, 500,000 people, or families rather, received free land. So if those families are 4 people, you have 2 million people living on the land. Obviously, families were much larger than that in most cases at this time period. So you can imagine how many people are moving into this Western land because of the promise of free land. About 2.5 million people bought land through the Homestead Act. So you have about 5 times as many people buying land through the Homestead Act instead of taking it for free. Problem with homestead land, especially the land that was offered for free, is that it was often not the best land. It was far from a water source. It might be rocky. It might not be as conducive to farming as other land that you could buy. So it was often a better choice to buy a better piece of land than to take free land because it was hard to farm that land. We also have the problem of drought in this area, which causes about 2 out of 3 homesteaders to give up. By 1900, about 80% of homesteaders had failed. They had not made it through their 5 years of living and working on the land before it actually belonged to them. And some of the hardships that were caused, or that living on the land had, included that you might not have any neighbors for miles. 160 acres is a lot of land, and so you might not be close to anybody else. Nobody else can help you with your land. You're not available to help other people either. As we said, there's not a lot of water. If there's a drought period, then you're going to really have trouble. But if you're not close to a water source, then you're also going to have trouble just with drinking water for yourself, for your animals, and that kind of thing. They're also suffering from a lot of blizzards in this area. It gets very hot in the summer, and so weather is causing big issues as well. And the climate, in terms of weather, is not great in this area. The 100th meridian, so the 100th line of latitude, separated 2 climate regions. The one to the east had water. The one to the west did not have water. Geologist John Wesley Powell was the first person who warned that farming in the West was risky. He warned people in 1874 that this was not going to be the easiest place to farm. People ignored him. But in the 1880s, there was a 6-year drought, and he was proven correct. So a lot of people are struggling with that, which meant that they have to come up with new farming techniques. And the one major technique that they come up with is dry farming. And dry farming basically means that you are constantly turning the land over. There are going to be periods of time when the land is going to go fallow. You're not going to farm anything on it to try to trap and contain moisture. Helps in the short term, but over time, it starts leading to the Dust Belt, and you get the Dust Bowl of the 1930s during the Great Depression, when the whole land is just dusty and there's no water and nothing will grow. In addition, there's a new type of wheat that comes from Russia. It's imported. It is tougher. It is more able to withstand drought than older types of wheat. People are not growing corn as much. They're going to grow sorghum instead because it doesn't require as much water. And so these new techniques are going to lead to a surplus of food on the market, which is going to cause problems in the future. So in addition to coming up with new ways of farming and new farm products, you're also going to see new inventions that are going to make farming easier. In the 1890s, the gas tractor is invented, and so farmers are going to start being able to use tractors more easily because they're now powered by gasoline. Women on farms are basically doing whatever needs to be done. So there's no clear line between male work and female work anymore. Whatever needs to be done is what women are going to do. So all of these things, not so much women obviously, but all of these things are going to lead to a decline in the ability to farm. And another issue that they're going to have is the fact that there's no wood. You're in the plains area, there's prairie grass, but there are no trees. And so you have to figure out how to do things without using wood. So you have to come up with a new way to create fences. We talked last class about the invention of barbed wire by Joseph Glidden. This made it possible to keep cattle off of your property from grazing on your land, from trampling your crops without having to make wood fences. We're going to see housing, which may have been log cabins before, be made out of sod. And to create a sod house, you basically cut up pieces of prairie grass sod, which is hardy. It's not like grass that we have on our lawns today. It's going to be thicker and better able to withstand weather, though it's not perfect. And you're basically going to pile it up and create the walls of your house. And then for fuel, they're going to use buffalo chips. So you can imagine that as the buffalo population begins declining, there's going to be an issue with that as well. This is an example of a sod house, or sod bricks rather. You can see the pieces of grass in it as well. But this just shows you it looks a lot like a regular brick would, but it's made out of prairie grass. So we're going to talk now about issues with farming, and we talked about some of them in the last slide. We're going to talk about how that starts to lead farmers to look for ways to organize. So, sorry, this is in the wrong order. Farmers are forced to turn to a single cash crop because it's easier for them to farm. So something like the Russian wheat that we talked about, or sorghum, they're going to turn to growing just one thing on their farms to make money. But they're very dependent on the market. The market is going to set the price. It's not going to have anything to do with them, which is then going to set how much money they make. They're going to have to become businessmen as well as farmers. They're going to have to learn a lot more about making money than just about farming. They're going to have to think about the impact of railroads, banks, factories, machinery, which is the next point on here, as they talk about or start thinking about how they're going to maintain their farms. In the 1880s, prices on these single cash crops, especially on wheat, are going to decline, and that's going to be due in large part to overproduction. If crops are succeeding elsewhere in the world market, then the price of U.S. grain is going to fall. So things like wheat or sorghum, or those who were farming corn, are going to have issues. Low prices, deflated currency, so money's not worth as much, is going to doom many farmers. There's going to be a static money supply. They're not adding more money to the market, so there's not enough money to go around. Prices are going to fall. Farmers are not going to be able to pay their bills, and a lot of them are going to be forced to declare bankruptcy. In addition, they're dealing with insects, weather problems. Boll weevils and grasshoppers are coming in and destroying crops. In the southern parts of the West, there are going to be floods that are going to erode the fields, while in other parts of the West, drought is going to be an issue. Land is going to be overassessed, which means that it's going to be, according to the government, worth a lot more than it actually is. Farmers are not going to be able to pay their taxes. So you're going to see issues with those things as well. In addition, they're having to buy large amounts of machinery. They're going to have to go into debt to do that, which means that they're overproducing the amount of food. They're actually able to produce about 3 times the amount of food by 1890 that they had been able to produce in 1860. So all of these issues are causing them problems. They also have to deal with, as I said before, competition throughout the world. In a factory owners in the East did not have to compete as much with world markets because goods coming into the country, manufactured goods coming into the country, were taxed. There was a tariff on imports. With farming products, there was no tariff. And so if you have grains coming in from other parts of the world, they are the same price as your grain from the West, and if there's too much, then your price is going to fall. Okay? So some of these pictures over here, this one right here is a boll weevil. It wreaked havoc on farming crops. It also wreaked havoc on cotton in the South. This is a swarm of grasshoppers in Denver. So you can see what that looks like when we talk about a plague of grasshoppers. We're talking about swarms and swarms of grasshoppers everywhere, and they're going to destroy the crops as well as create other problems. Farmers are going to have to store their excess grain in warehouses, which means that they're going to be at the mercy of the railroads, who they are renting warehouse space from. They can hold farmers to whatever price they want to set because farmers don't really have a choice. Either they paid the high prices to ship the grain and get it out of the warehouse, or it sat in the warehouses and spoiled. In a lot of cases, it could cost half of the sale price for them to transport their grain, so that's a huge problem as well. One of the biggest problems that farmers face was that they're half of the U.S. population by 1890, but they're not organized. You have factory workers in the East starting to organize to be able to lobby for their own behalf. Farmers are having issues doing that. They're individualistic, they're independent, they're mostly working without seeing any neighbors for long periods of time, and they weren't organized very well. And so in our next couple of classes, we're going to talk about their attempts to organize and how that may or may not have been as successful as they wanted to be. So, hope you've gotten a lot of information from these slides. If you have questions, feel free to email me or text me through Remind, and I will see you in class.